This video is sponsored by PLAUD. A slow and agonizing death. That could be the future of the European Union if it doesn't drastically change, at least according to Mario Draghi. And he's not just anyone. He's the former head of the European Central Bank, the guy who famously saved the euro back in 2012 with his whatever it takes line. And he's not wrong. Back in 2007, the EU's economy was actually bigger than America's. Fast forward to today, and the US has pulled ahead by a staggering 30%. Ouch. But at least we've managed to overtake China, right? You've got to celebrate the small wins. But the picture gets even gloomier when you look at productivity. How much we actually get out of each hour worked. And compared to the US, the gap keeps widening. So, to stop Europe from falling further behind, Draghi proposed a massive economic plan last year. Basically, a 5-point to-do list. Strengthening security, simplify the endless EU rules, unlock capital to boost innovation, fix Europe's messy energy market, and finally, improve the EU's budget. And our very own president, Mrs. von der Leyen, in her State of the Union last week, agreed.
We are tackling the key bottlenecks identified by the Draghi report. That's from energy to capital, from investment to simplification.
Now that it has been a year since Draghi dropped his plan, has the EU been delivering? I'm Lambertus, and in this video, we're going to dig into those 5 points and see what the EU has actually done. Then we'll rank the progress from 1 to 5. 1 meaning literally no progress at all, and 5 meaning excellent progress. And of course, we will give you our take at the end. Now before we look at how the EU is doing, a quick word from our sponsor. At EU Made Simple, we're constantly on video calls with EU officials, journalists, sponsors, and our team across Europe. These calls are full of ideas, but remembering every single detail, that is hard. We used to scribble notes or stick post-its everywhere, until I found PLAUD. It's an AI-powered note-taker. One press and it records the meeting. Any ideas in the group? Then transcribes everything into clean text, with summary and action points. I don't even need to touch a pen or keyboard. It works completely hands-free. And when I need to find something later, I just use PLAUD's Ask AI. I might ask something like, what are some of our video proposals from our French channel manager Paul? And it finds it in seconds.
So one of the videos that's been on my mind for a while is what does France get out of being in the EU?
The audio is crystal clear. It supports 112 languages, and you can get 300 free transcription minutes a month. Honestly, I could have used it back when I was a student. I can literally just get a summary of the latest lecture I fell asleep in. And in our case, in journalism, confidentiality is absolutely essential. PLAUD takes that seriously too. It's compliant with major security standards and uses AWS-grade encryption. Use my code EUMS10 to get 10% off when purchasing PLAUD Note or Note Pin. Link in the description below. Back to the video. The first point in Draghi's report was all about strengthening Europe's security, and that really comes in 2 parts. Scaling up the defense industry and reducing dependencies. On defense, you might think that the EU is already on the right track. Back in 2015, NATO countries were spending on average just 1.5% of GDP on defense, a historic low. Today, that number is climbing fast, heading towards NATO's new 3.5% target. So far, so good. But Draghi's message was clear. It's not just about spending money. EU countries need to spend it smarter by pooling their orders, using Europe's economies of scale, and sticking to a Buy European principle. And the EU has started to move on this. There's now a dedicated defense commissioner, Brussels has published a full strategy on how to rearm Europe, and most importantly, the 150 billion euro SAFE initiative was launched to boost joint procurement and ramp up defense spending. 19 countries have already applied for cheap loans to strengthen their defense capabilities, with one big great condition. 65% of that money has to be spent on suppliers from the EU or close neighbors. A solid start, but we have a long way to go. EU member states plan to spend 2 trillion euros on defense by 2031. So a 150 billion euro fund seems modest. And with an incomplete single market, which Draghi says works like a 64% tariff on equipment and 95% on metals, inefficiencies remain huge. In terms of dependencies, the EU remains highly vulnerable on semiconductors and critical raw materials, but there are some steps being taken. For example, the Raw Materials Act, that aims to secure key raw materials by mining more at home, recycling more, and avoiding overdependence on any single country in the world. Or the CHIPS Act, that seeks to mobilize over 43 billion euros in investments to boost Europe's semiconductor industry and double its market share to 20% by 2030. So yeah, things are being done, but it's still mostly driven by national capitals, with only limited use of EU-level synergies. That's why I'd give this area a 3 out of 5. Next up is simplifying the endless EU rules, and here Draghi would be proud. The EU has rolled out a long list of proposals to cut the regulatory burden on companies, especially small companies. In total, the expected savings amount to at least 9 billion euros. Take sustainability, for example. Far fewer companies will now fall under the environmental reporting obligations, and those that do will face lighter duties. Business groups are delighted. Green groups are appalled. And in the parliament, the main resistance comes from the left. But since right-wing groups hold the numbers, much of this package is likely to pass, even if everything is not final yet. And soon, we'll also see the 28th regime legislation proposal, an optional EU-wide framework that companies can use instead of the 27 national systems. It's called the 28th regime because it sits on top of all the others, offering a single set of rules for things like registration, taxation, or reporting. I can already picture Draghi smiling, because here progress has been significant. And while there's loads more work ahead, this area clearly deserves a 5 out of 5. Draghi's third policy area is closing the innovation gap to the US. And this one is critical, because the EU is so far behind. Just look at these numbers. In R&D, Europe spends less than half of what the US does. And if we look at software and IT services, it gets embarrassing. It's closer to 1/10. And when it comes to risky capital investments, you can hardly see the EU on the chart. In 2024, the US hovered around $200 billion a year, while the EU barely reached $20 billion. So, what is the EU doing to fix it? Well, there are some big initiatives. First, the Savings and Investment Union. The goal here is to finally break down national barriers in Europe's capital markets. Things like different rules for stock exchanges, insolvency, or company law. And this really matters, because 3/4 of innovators say that these differences are holding back investment. Second, there's Invest AI. This one aims to mobilize 200 billion euros for artificial intelligence, including a brand new 20 billion euro fund for AI gigafactories, right here in Europe. And these tenders will come later this year. And third, the EU Apply AI strategy. The idea here is simple. Help more companies actually use AI, because at the moment, only 13% of small European businesses do. They're all great ideas, but at the moment that's all they are, ideas. Like with so many of Draghi's proposals, you can already see the pushback from national governments on sensitive issues like tax or insolvency rules. So, given how important this area is, progress is simply too slow, and my score here is 2 out of 5. Now, let's talk about policy area 4, energy. Draghi's diagnosis was very blunt. Europe's high energy costs are strangling its industries, and he calls for massive investment, up to €500 billion in power grids this decade, and cutting our dependence on foreign suppliers. Since then, Brussels has promised to ditch Russian energy completely by 2027, and sketched out a plan for 8 new energy highways to improve Europe's grid. And yes, dependency on Russia has gone down, which is progress. Woohoo! But at the same time, von der Leyen has pledged up to $750 billion in American energy imports as part of a trade deal with Washington. If that really happens, we're just swapping one dependency for another. So, lots of big words for now, but really not much action yet. My score, 1.5 out of 5, until we see some more concrete steps. And finally, we come to the EU's long-term budget. The Commission's proposal for 2028 to 2034 sets aside 409 billion euros to fund Europe's industrial revival. Likely a solid start in Draghi's eyes. But here's the problem. One of Draghi's most talked about recommendations was joint EU borrowing for shared public goods. On that front, no appetite, no progress. And the overall budget size, 1.26% of the EU's gross national income, even counting repayments of the post-COVID debt, just doesn't match the scale of the challenges that Draghi laid out. So, my score here is also relatively low, 2 out of 5. Not terrible, but still lacking the scale and ambition that Europe really needs. So here's the overview of the progress 1 year on from the Draghi report. Overall, when you average the scores for each policy area, the total progress can be rated as 2.7 out of 5. Again, not great, not terrible. Here's what I think. While progress has been slow, I'm staying positive. Remember, we had the EU elections last year, and it took 4 months just to get a new European Commission in place, so a lot of time was lost. But the next 12 months are crucial, and for me, there are 2 initiatives that will make or break this whole project. First, the Capital Markets Union. Without a true single market for finance and startup investments, Europe will keep falling behind the US. We need harmonized rules so investors can back more European unicorns. Second, the so-called 28th regime. Let's be honest, the EU is never going to harmonize all tax and company rules across 27 countries anytime soon. But creating a brand new 28th framework for companies to opt into, in my opinion, that's fascinating. Just imagine the long run. If enough businesses move into it, it could become the single market for companies and slowly make the patchwork of national rules obsolete. Yes, this is super ambitious, but maybe the start of something big. But let us know what you think of the EU's progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and to support us further, consider joining us on Patreon. Thank you to our presidents, Jan Schauke, Christian Peter, AGVD, Daniel Unite Europe, Stefan, and Kiki Loxen. See you in the next video.